What is up, Flannelverse, and also DK's people? I asked DK; he doesn't have a name for his people yet, so that's something we need to start working on. Have a name for all of DK's audience. But what is up to all of you? Thank you for joining us for this Thursday Night Football Bills-Dolphins stream. We're going to go position by position, work through this showdown slate. I'm super excited to be here with DK. I spent a lot of time on this slate already. Did a full write up on it. Did an expert survey. Did a morning show. So I am very prepared, and I know DK always comes prepared. DK, how excited are you for this slate?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good one. I mean, usually Thursday Night Football, not the best slates usually, but this one's great. I mean, should be a lot of offense scored in this one. And yeah, appreciate you having me on. Also, I just wanted to shout out Neil for being a graphic design expert. Great work on the thumbnail.
Thank you. I feel I really like these thumbnails. I feel like I can't tell if you're trolling me. It'd be fair if you are trolling me because I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah, I thought okay, I appreciate that. I thought it looked pretty good, but also I have no background in design. It's all just kind of like me going by feel. Six also says Tech Lord Neil. Yeah, I mean I just have so many skills here. DK. All right, we're gonna go position by position, starting with quarterbacks, and I feel like it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the quarterbacks are always some of the best projected plays on the slate. Pretty big priorities in general, especially when you have Josh Allen on the slate, just an elite rushing quarterback, 15 rushing touchdowns last year, just insane. Let's start with that. Josh Allen, to what extent are you interested in playing Josh Allen tonight? I know you play a single entry, so we got to explain that we're coming from different perspectives. We're both playing GPPs, fairly large field. I play like the largest field GPPs. DK plays, I'd say, do you play mid stake GPPs? Would you say like
yeah,
you're playing?
Depends. I'm in the 3-3-3 tonight, but usually I'll do like mid stake single entry stuff.
Yeah, so like that's kind of the borderline. That's high stakes to me. A lot of people call that mid stakes, but you're playing smaller field contests. We're coming from a different perspective a little bit in terms of like our interest level in different players. In your single entry, is Josh Allen just a lock for that kind of in that mid stakes kind of contest?
Yeah. I think it's pretty hard to get away from Josh Allen. I mean, just in general, the showdown slate so far, I feel like the quarterbacks have been underpriced. And I think that's the same with this slate. Like we'll talk about Tua in a bit too. I think he's a bit underpriced. But yeah, Josh Allen 11K. I would expect his like average price in this situation to be like in the 12K range. So you know, with a high total and with his rushing upside, I think it's pretty hard to get away from him in single entry stuff, especially high stakes.
And how would you? So I think the answer to this is somewhat different in single entry versus like the largest field, because the largest field you kind of have to hit the nuts. So I think like your correlations are a bit more important in the contest that I play, because you really do like if Tua throws multiple touchdowns to different guys, well, one of those players who he throws touchdown to might just like not be in the field at all. So it doesn't matter that you need to stack up. Like you don't need to focus on stacking a guy like Tua quite as much. Now Josh Allen, I use Tua as the example, even as we're talking about Josh Allen, because you never really have to stack Josh Allen anyway. He is just so elite as a rusher. But are you inclined in your contest to stack Josh Allen, or are you just like, whatever, I'm going to play Josh Allen. He could just score 2 rushing touchdowns again. How do you approach stacking there?
Yeah. I think I'm probably trying to get at least one pass catcher with him. I mean, not saying a situation can't play out where he like rushes into or something. I will say that the one thing is it was his opposite hand, right? He's got like his opposite hand got a little bit banged up last week. So maybe he's going to be not running as much. I mean, I know the Bills have talked about over the last couple of years, like trying to get him to not run the ball as much, but we saw week 1.
He keeps saying it.
Yeah.
He says it over and over. This is not a way to sustain a career. I can't be running this much. Yeah. I mean, like last year, he only rushed for like 500 some yards. So the yardage was down pretty significantly from previous seasons. So like there was some truth to it. He did rush a little bit less, but they clearly trust him at the goal line. So, it does. Maybe it lowers the floor just a little bit that he is running 300 fewer yards over the course of the season. Like the yardage comes down a little bit if he just doesn't happen to end up in the end zone. The floor theoretically comes down, but he scored 15 touchdowns last year, so it doesn't actually cap it all that much. Doesn't bring it down that much. For large field GPPs, so the way the contest I play, I prefer to stack Josh Allen in general. I think I would I want him stacked in my lineups, but even though he is a quarterback that clearly you can play him unstacked, I like the idea of stacking today. I also, the more I've thought about this slate, the more I like the idea. And this is partially, I looked at ETR's numbers. Like they give you how owned they expect different combos to be, 1-5, 2-4, different teams. They have the 5-man Bills stack being super low owned. So 5-man Bills, 1 Dolphins running back being super low owned at ETR, which makes me think, man, that's pretty interesting. If I do Josh Allen at captain and play it through, what if he just throws for the touchdowns instead of running them? That's a pretty interesting way of playing this slate. So I have a few different ways I want to play, but that is one that I think I'm going to lean into a little bit, is the Josh Allen at captain with multiple pass catchers from the Bills is a pretty interesting way to play. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I like that. I prefer building an onslaught build like that in situations where the field is not going there, which is tonight, and in like a high power offense. Like this Bills offense can put up a ton of points. And again, like they can spread it out too. We kind of saw week 1, they spread out the targets. So, I think in a large field tournament, I would definitely have a few Bills onslaughts in there, just because I think this offense can put up a lot of points, and they can spread it out where, that type of build could work out. So, I saw that as well in ETR. It's very few people are building a Bills onslaught. So in large field tournament, obviously in the, tournament that I'm in, I won't be playing that, but if I was making a ton of lineups, I would definitely have a few Bills onslaughts in there.
Yeah, definitely better for like large field GPPs, the tournaments I'm playing. So Tua is an interesting case because he's a little bit different than Josh Allen. Because like I say, I'm always stacking Tua. He just doesn't run enough. Yeah. I always want to have at least one pass catcher with Tua. I think you can certainly include Achane among those pass catchers after we saw a little bit of a bump in target share last week, like a 6% bump, really promising 7 targets last week, and they were using him all over. Really fun to see the way they were using Achane last week. But again, I want to have at least one stacking partner with Tua, regardless of where he is in my lineup. I prefer 2 if I have him in the 2 or more if I have him in the captain spot. I think I'm going to be lightly fading Tua tonight, but I'm also terrified of it with the Teron Johnson out in the secondary for the Bills. I think could be a really nice spot. Like he could just have a blow up game. So I'm definitely not full fading Tua. But I like, when I was trying to think of who can I full fade tonight, he's the easiest one for me, just because he has kind of fairly high ownership, but I don't feel great about it. How do you feel about Tua tonight?
Yeah, I don't have any like super strong takes on Tua. I don't think he's someone that I would consider much in the captain spot for single entry stuff. I usually, if I'm playing a quarterback in the captain spot, I'm looking for someone that has rushing upside. I played Lamar captain on Thursday night last week. I think Josh Allen's a very good captain play. I'm not as excited about Tua in the captain. I think he's a fine flex play. I do think he's, a reasonable fade as well. I don't think he's like a must on the slate. I think, Josh Allen and Tyreek are going to get a lot more ownership at the very top. But yeah, you mentioned Achane. I do like that the Dolphins ran a lot of 2 running back sets last week. So you saw Achane get a lot more targets. So he's definitely someone you can include in the Tua stack for sure. Yeah. Basically treating him as like running back / wide receiver. Tua is someone I think is more of a flex play for me, but not a must play either. He's someone that I think you can get away with fading.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant to say that I'm fading him, because again, I'm like, man, I can see the upside case for Tua. Like he could have a monster game here. It'll be a light fade for me. So if you see me in a contest with Tua, don't yell at me. I am playing some Tua. I would be terrified to completely fade Tua. Maybe I'll even come back around and find somebody else that I'd rather fade. But as of right now, like you gotta take stand somewhere. You gotta be a little bit light somewhere. And I think I'm going to be a little bit lighter on Tua, which is probably like 40% to the field, having 55-60%, not taking a huge stand there. Any other notes on quarterbacks?
No, I think again, Josh Allen, one of the top plays at the captain spot. Cash games as well. If you guys are playing cash games, he's right up there. I think either him or Josh or Wilson would be guys I would consider. But yeah, nothing else really to mention there for quarterbacks.
All right, we will move on to running backs, which I think is one of the more interesting conversations that we can have today. We did get the news. We got the inactives. Achane is in tonight, which, that's fun because we have Mostert out. For those who don't know, Mostert is not playing tonight. Normally, Achane has to kind of split the load with Mostert. So maybe he has a bigger load tonight. Maybe he's just taking all the carries. But kind of unclear. He also was dealing with a knee injury, which is why he was questionable. They said he's going to go through pregame warmups. Wouldn't know if he was going to play for sure until game warmups. But we know now Achane is at least active. How are you approaching Achane tonight to start? And then we can talk about the backup running backs as well.
Yeah, so I think Achan's a pretty scary fade. Obviously not a must play either, but someone that just has insane upside. I got pretty tilted last year at times when Miami's backfield was like a clear split, and I felt like he was like way overowned, and he just kept killing me because the guy is super fast and it's like again has a massive ceiling, can break long runs, can break a long reception as well. So my expectation is I don't think he's going to be limited. What I saw on Twitter too is kind of similar. Of I'm not expecting any limitations. Again, we saw yesterday in practice looked like he was moving around fine. He didn't have a non-contact jersey on either, so I'm expecting a normal workload here for Achane. The question obviously is what's going to happen behind him. But yeah, I'm not really worried about the workload for him tonight. I don't think he'll be limited. And with that being said, I think he has a massive ceiling. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there with Achane.
Yeah, and I think I'm on the same page as you. Like we know Achane already showed such a massive ceiling last year. You looked at his explosive run rate was over 12. I think it was near 13%. That is just insane. That's percentage of runs over 15 yards or longer. Absolutely insane how efficient Achane was last year. I think everybody knows this. I'm not breaking any news here about Achane, but now we add in the passing game, 7 targets last week, running him all over the field. Like he could have a massive season, especially if Mostert does miss time. So if you think Achane is full health, like it's really tough to fade Achane here. You can see the projection. I'm going to have a lot of Achane. I think he's a solid captain play. Yeah, I don't know how much more there is to be said about Achane. I did want to answer this question. Beezy says, asking if we are worried about the weather. I just looked up. My weather guy, Kevin Roth, is not super concerned. Scattered storms throughout the afternoon are going to dissipate as the evening comes. So I don't think weather is going to be a huge concern here. That's the latest I've seen. If I hear otherwise, I will let you know. But that is the latest that I've seen from Roth, is that weather shouldn't be a huge concern.
Yeah, that's what I do too. I was like, I didn't really didn't know there's like massive weather, so I was like, oh, let me just see what Kevin Ross said, and you obviously were one step ahead of me. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried too much about the weather. One other thing to note with Achane too, just wanted to mention before we move on, is he ran 28 of the 48 routes. So like I said, he is involved as a runner and as a passer. So I'd expect similar, assuming he can stay healthy.
Yeah, really, really excited about Achane over the course of the season. I want to say this is a good reminder. Gabe says, "I Showdown Shaman. Hope you're doing well. Used to always tune in with Stochastic. Happy to stumble across your page. Appreciate that, Gabriel." And that is a great reminder to remind people. Please do subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. This is being simulcast to the Flannelverse channel. That is my channel, but also to DK's channel, which I think I put now I'm questioning whether I remember to put the link in the description of the video. I think I put the link in the description of this video. Otherwise, you can find him on YouTube. Would appreciate a subscription to the channel, to my small and growing channel. DK, already a pretty established channel. He's been doing great DFS content for a long time, but of course we always appreciate subscribes, like the video, comment. All of that is very helpful to us as we're trying to grow our channels. But thanks for stopping in, Gabe. So you are not really that concerned about Achane. It sounds like you're just you're going to play it as though he is good to go. That was kind of the reports from beat reporters who were at the field, said he doesn't look like he's limping at all. Looks like he's not limited in practice. That was yesterday. He did say they were going 3/4 speed, which is, who knows how much of a difference that makes 3/4 speed versus full speed. But all the rumors were that he looked pretty good in practice. I'm treating him, I think, basically like a full go, except for in some lineups, or maybe I want to go with this backup. But you're playing just one lineup. You're treating it like it's a full go for HM.
I am, yeah. I do think, again, if I was building a ton of lineups, I would probably have a few for that narrative of, maybe he, re-aggravates the ankle injury or something and look to both Wilson and Wright, something like that. But yeah, I think in a single entry stuff, I'm assuming full go for him.
Yep. Okay. And I think the majority of my lineups, I am going to assume the same thing with Achane. But this is where we have to talk about the other part of this running game, which is, normally we have Raheem Mostert there, basically splitting carries with Achane. All off season, I was a best ball bro. I drafted so much Jalen Wright on my best ball teams because the thought process was, well, Jalen Wright is basically a clone. He's a super speedy, athletic running back who could come in easily and just play the Mostert role or the Achane role if one of them goes down. He's just another speedy running back you throw in there. You continue doing the same plays. But last week, Wright was inactive. Jeff Wilson took 5 carries for 26 yards. looked really good, and like he has a long history with Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel trusts Jeff Wilson, so I'm sort of feeling like Jeff Wilson is the safer of the backup running back options, the more likely to take on a big workload. But there is still a part of me that's like, man, Jalen Wright, he's exciting. He's an exciting rookie. He was inactive last week. Maybe they would have played him. Maybe he would have played last week if he had been active. They didn't know they were going to use him because Mostert was in. So there is a lot of uncertainty here with the backup running back slot. I'm leaning toward Jeff Wilson, but I don't have that strong of a lean. Wouldn't shock me if Jalen Wright is the RB2 here. How are you feeling about these running backs? How are you treating the backup running backs?
Yeah, I think there's obviously some unknowns. This is not a guarantee, but I'm kind of under the same assumption. So in the preseason, again, I grinded preseason DFS, and Jeff Wilson was consistently playing ahead of Jalen Wright. And then we saw it in week 1. Jeff Wilson was the RB3, and Wright was inactive. Now, it's not a guarantee that Wilson's the RB2, but I think that is the safe thing to assume. And I think Jalen Wright, RB3, maybe mixing in a little bit. But it's definitely possible that Wright could play over Wilson. And I think making that type of play in a large field tournament makes some sense. But I think right now, for like, if you're playing like single entry or high stake stuff, Jeff Wilson, in my opinion, is the best value in the slate. I'm assuming he's the RB2. I'm assuming he'll get a good chunk of early down work. So I think he's like your top value right now.
And this is one, and I'm looking around the industry at ownership numbers, because that would play a big factor in how I want to play this. Like if everybody was playing Jeff Wilson and we were going to get Wright at like 2% ownership, then suddenly I'd be like, you know what, I'm comfortable with that bet. Like I would definitely make the bet on Wright. We are seeing a significant amount of ownership. It's actually shot up quite a bit throughout the day on Jeff Wilson, both looking like they're going to be double-digit ownership, but it still does look like Jeff Wilson is going to get significantly more ownership on Wright. So honestly, I don't feel bad about either play. I think Wright is the safer play. I think Wilson is the safer play. I think Wright is like there's legit like zero risk. Like he just like doesn't play at all. I think that is the floor for Wright. I guess that could theoretically happen. Maybe Wright is ahead of Wilson, but I think it's more likely to happen with Wright that he hits the floor. I think Jeff Wilson is likelier to hit his ceiling, which I don't know what that is. Maybe that's 15 fantasy points for Jeff Wilson. I think that is a likelier outcome than Jalen Wright hitting his ceiling. But I also think Jalen Wright's ceiling is higher. Like he does have a massive ceiling if he does just come in and play that Mostert role. I think both are in play. Would you ever play both together now that Achane is active? That in like the largest field GPP. I know in your contest you're probably not doing it. I think in like this, with Achane you probably don't want to do it in the smallest contest. But if you were in the millie that I'm playing, how do you feel about playing Wright and Achane together? Because I'm honestly torn.
Playing
sorry, Wilson and Wright, not Wright and Achane. My bad.
Jeff Wilson and Jalen Wright together.
Yeah.
I think you can do that in a large field tournament and just kind of play for that narrative of, Achane's going to get banged up or, aggravate that. And then you get two of the top values there. I think that's reasonable in a large field tournament. Also, I was just looking at, I wanted to see what the odds were for anytime touchdown score for Jeff Wilson. And it's at plus 185. So clearly, that's just on DraftKings Sportsbook. I only looked at one book, but clearly books are expecting him to have a pretty nice workload. I'm curious to see if they have his rush attempts prop up. Let's see. Okay, so they have his over-under rushing yards of 29.5. Again, this is just on DraftKings, so expect him to have, again, a decent workload. In a large field tournament, I think playing those two cheap backs in a lineup is at least viable, but I wouldn't do it a ton.
Okay. I think that is probably how I see it too. Like I don't want to do a ton of those two together with Achane in like that. That's a bet on Achane being inactive or like getting in-game injury. At that point, maybe those two can both work out. But with Achane in, it does feel like it's a long shot kind of bet. Now there is, I guess, a world in which we have the T Higgins scenario from last year, 2 years ago at this point, when he was technically active and then just didn't play at all. Like it was like, oh, T Higgins is in, and then he doesn't see the field. That's not out of the realm of possibility that Achane, but I think all indications are that Achane is good to go. So I think I'm not going to do both of Wilson and Wright together. I don't think it's the craziest thing to do for like a large field GPP if you are 150 maxing. But yeah, probably not going to be the approach that I take. Are you playing any Alec Ingold? Sorry, would you play if you were 150 maxing?
Yeah, I think Ingold's playable because he ran 10 routes last week. So wasn't as so one of the prop bets that I was on Monday night was Kyle Juszczyk over receiving yards. And that was a bit of a sweat early on, but ended up paying off in the second half. Alec Ingold's not going to run as many routes, but he can like kind of play a similar role. Like he can move all over the field, not just play fullback. He can line up, as like a tight end or even out wide. So at close to the min price, he's I think
playable if you're 150 max. I don't think I'm going to have any today. So just to give you the full scope, like I'm probably going to play 45, 50 lineups. And I don't think I'm going to have any Ingold, but yeah, I think in a 150 max, as you say, playable, I think it's exactly how I would describe him. And then the other side of it, the Bills, James Cook projects a little bit worse than Devin Achane. He is 9,000. He also saw a little bit of a boost in at least in terms of route participation last week, was up from like 40% to from last year to like 48% in week 1. So that was at least promising to see that he's running routes out there. He also saw the only running back carry inside the 5-yard line for the Bills last week, which was at least it was unexpected. I think that most of us had kind of made the assumption Ray Davis will probably come in and be the goal line back since they were hesitant to use James Cook at the goal line last year. So some positive indication for James Cook last week. Do you have any interest, or would you have any interest in playing him in a large field GPP this week?
Yeah, no, I think James Cook's coming in at a solid price point. He's at 9K. I think he might go a little bit overlooked today just because I think that kind of chalk build is me getting those guys at the very top and then going to value at the bottom. So James Cook's kind of at the upper mid-range, or I guess, the lower end of the spend ups. But yeah, pretty good workload. Week 1 was good to see. Again, 37 of the 61 snaps. As you said, 15 of the 32 routes, almost 50% of the time he was running a route. So reasonable price point. Again, I think Achane will get more ownership. But Cook's still in play. They really didn't give the backups too much work. We can talk about them a little bit, but Ty Johnson, 14 snaps, Ray Davis, 6 snaps. So I think James Cook pretty clearly RB1, is involved in the passing game. And I think will come in a lower ownership than Achane.
Yeah, and I kind of like the idea of playing James Cook in the captain spot. Also, I think he's going to be one of those, like, he's going to be single digit owned, and he's the type of play that like he could get there without having to correlate with anybody. Ship and I talked about this earlier this week about how like having a running back in the captain can be nice just from the standpoint of you don't have to like let that dictate the rest of your lineup. Now there are multiple ways to look at that. Like sometimes like, okay, this directs me in how I want to do the rest of my lineup, but it is, you're not going to be funneled into the same lineups as everybody else who has that player in the flex, in the captain spot. So I'm kind of into the idea of playing some James Cook in the captain spot, probably more than the 5-6% that the field will be at. I think I'll have more than that of James Cook. Just a sort of interesting play there. But yeah, 19 carries last week, ran routes on nearly half of, if he had run just one more, it would have been half of the routes. All promising stuff for James Cook. Now, we kind of debated this morning, Ty Johnson versus Ray Davis as the running back 2 for Buffalo last week. Ty Johnson, Ray Davis had, I think, 3 carries for 13 yards. Ty Johnson, 2 for 7. So from a carries perspective, not that different. But then Ty Johnson ran like 27% of the routes. So I thought that was pretty promising. Ty Johnson being $1,400 cheaper. To me, that broke the tie toward Ty Johnson being my preference between the two of them. Ship thought, well, Ray Davis is more likely to just come in and vulture a goal line touchdown, which is probably true. So we kind of, couldn't decide on who is the better RB2 option, or couldn't agree on who is the better RB2 option. But I think both are, in play for large field GPPs. I assume you're not playing either of them in a, single entry mid stakes.
I'm not, but I think right now, factoring in the salary, I would prefer Ty Johnson. Again, week 1 snaps, as you brought up, like Ty Johnson played 14 snaps as opposed to Ray Davis 6, and then he ran 8 routes as opposed to Davis's 2. You could make the argument on the flip side that Ray Davis is a rookie. Maybe they're ease him in the first game and then give him a little bit of a workload, or bigger workload tonight. Depth chart. I mean, they do technically have Davis listed ahead of Ty Johnson. At least that's on DraftKings. I don't know if they have that on the official depth chart. Let me look it up. But yeah, I think right now my preference is Ty Johnson. He's cheaper. And I think I feel a little bit better about that. Oh, no, they do have Ty Johnson on the official depth chart. They have him, at least on the Bills website, they have Ty Johnson RB2. On DraftKings has Ray Davis. But I think right now, factoring everything that we saw week one, I would give the edge to Ty Johnson.
And I also think, like, the reasoning for Ray Davis would be like he seems more likely to be the goal line back, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that Ty Johnson could be. He's still 210 pounds. He's not 180 out there. He's like big enough that he could get those goal line looks. So yeah, factoring in the passing game participation. Of course, the same could be said for Ray Davis. He could be more involved in the passing game. He was in college a pretty capable pass catcher. So I think both are totally fine. I just break the tie toward the cheaper guy because it's easier to pay off a $2,200 price tag than a $3,600 price tag. But either certainly in play. I don't think I'm playing any Reggie Gilliam. Are you?
No, I think he played, what was it? He played 4 snaps, only ran 1 route. I would rather play Ingle on the opposite side if I'm going to play fullback.
Yeah, I think, you're right. He played very little, three total snaps last week. Not very promising for Reggie Gilliam. And now that I have this pulled up, I can see 14.8 expected fantasy points for James Cook last week. That was a pretty significant upgrade over his average from last year. Now, whether that's going to stick, who knows, but promising to see that type of expected fantasy points from James Cook. Anything else to say about the running backs on this slate?
No, I think we covered that pretty well.
All right, we will move on and talk about the wide receivers. Actually, we've gotten this question a lot, which is who is tonight's Allen Lazard? What was the one that worked out? That was Adam and I were pretty into him. Adam liked him, to his credit, liked him a lot better than Gibson. I was more on the fence. So it's like, I think I prefer Lazard, but I didn't feel that strongly about it. That worked out really well. So if you were on Lazard, that worked out really well. I also really liked Rashad Bateman week 1. People asking me who is the guy that we really like this week, and it was going to be Jeff Wilson for me until Jeff Wilson's ownership came up quite a bit. Looks like he's getting over a quarter of the field. Looks like they might be playing Jeff Wilson. So I think we're gonna keep on thinking about it. But I do have some plays that I really like at wide receiver and tight end. So I'll think about who that guy is exactly for me. I'll take a look at some ownerships. But let's start with, I think, the easier side of the game is Miami. Tyreek Hill. Look at this projection: 23.9 projection for Tyreek Hill. Can you fade Tyreek Hill? Like what are you doing with Tyreek Hill?
Same thing kind of I said about Achane. It's a scary fade, but obviously you can't play everyone at the top. I think if I had to prioritize one of like the Dolphins studs, I think I would give the edge to Tyreek Hill. Projecting for a little bit more ownership, but man, I mean, the ceiling is, we talked about the ceiling with Achane. The ceiling with Tyreek Hill, I think, is even higher. We saw week 1, a little bit of a slow start, but still finished 7 catches, 12 targets, 130 yards, and a touchdown. So single entry stuff, I expect his ownership to be higher than he's projected for, around 70%. I think that'll be higher in single entry stuff, higher stake stuff. So not an absolute must, but definitely someone that I'm leaning towards playing. And I think if I had to pick between the 2 spend ups with him and Achane, I would give the edge to Tyreek Hill.
Yeah. I like this comment from Blackjack Lloyd. These guys also play against us. Same for Stochastic Peeps. I'm here to see what they're telling people, everyone, not necessarily to follow. I mean, all right, man. If we're just giving you bad advice, we're not going to have anybody on our channel. I promise you, we are giving you the best advice we can possibly give you. I spent all day researching this slate yesterday, a lot of today as well. We're doing our best. We're going to get most things. We're not going to get everything right. We're going to get a lot wrong throughout the course of the year, but we're at least putting in the work, giving you the best information that we can here. You can make your own decisions. Tyreek Hill, fantastic play. As you say, I think he's going to be pretty highly owned. I mean, we know he's going to be pretty highly owned. Everybody wants to play Tyreek Hill. He was the number 2 overall receiver in terms of fantasy points. Last year, he projects extremely well. Going to be in, well over half of the field's lineups, I think. I think that's pretty warranted. I think I'm probably going to have a good amount of Tyreek Hill. Tyrone Johnson being out definitely helps the Miami play. So, hard to say anything negative about Tyreek Hill. He is a very, very good play here. Now, whether you play him at captain, I think he's going to be also very highly owned at captain. Just looking around projections around the industry and just using my brain, you'd think, yes, Tyreek Hill probably going to be owned quite a bit at captain. Going to be one of the highest owned captains on the slate. I think depending on where you look, he is the highest owned in terms of projected ownership. Actually, I think everywhere he is the highest projected ownership for a captain. Should he be? Do you think is he a better captain play than Josh Allen?
I think you're splitting hairs there. I would expect them to both come in similar ownership of the captain. So I don't think you can go wrong with either. I think maybe the floor is slightly higher with Josh Allen. But yeah, both have a very high ceiling. So yeah, no real strong takes there. I think they'll come in pretty similar.
I also, just to get back to another thing that Blackjack said, and I think it's actually a good point. He says QB at captain hasn't been very profitable overall, better off with a wide receiver or pass catching running back. I think that Josh Allen is sort of an exception just because he is like, I think the field typically does play the quarterback too much at captain, ends up being a little bit overowned. So I've actually historically, I think, overplayed quarterback at captain. I've been cutting back this year, trying not to play quite so much quarterback at captain, but I do think Josh Allen is just an exception because he is such a great rushing quarterback. I think that's you can kind of find exceptions with these rushing quarterbacks. Do you think the same way, DK?
Yeah, agree. Like I said, usually I'm looking to that quarterback that has that rushing upside, like a Josh Allen, Lamar, guys like that to play in the captain. I do think, yeah, some other quarterbacks do go overowned in large field stuff in the captain spot. So I do agree with that take. But yeah, I think Josh Allen's in a little bit of a different tier here.
Okay. Now getting back to wide receivers, Jalen Waddle, projects significantly worse than Tyreek Hill. He's also $3,000 cheaper. We know he has the speed to just break open a play. He got over 100 yards last week, had a very good game without scoring a touchdown. I think Jalen Waddle is a pretty solid play here again tonight. I think the ownership will be significantly lower than Tyreek Hill, as it probably should be. I don't know how much interest you have in Jalen Waddle tonight, and how much interest in the captain spot.
Yeah, kind of indifferent on Waddle as I usually am. I think, as most people say, I think he's a fine pivot off Hill. I mean, you can play them both together. Obviously, they're both going to soak up a lot of targets, and both have a pretty high ceiling. Tyreek Hill, obviously a higher ceiling than Waddle. But yeah, you said Waddle won for over 100 yards last week. He's still going to run a majority of the routes. One downside of Waddle is he is somewhat injury prone. Yeah. But yeah, reasonable ownership for him. I'm seeing, around 40-ish%, depending on what site you're looking at. Captain spot ownership would expect probably around 10-ish% for Waddle. So totally reasonable play. I don't really have any super strong takes one way or the other with him. But yeah, I think definitely a viable captain play. Probably will come in at like half the ownership of Hill in the captain spot. So totally reasonable pivot there.
Yeah, I just pulled up last week's game log just to show you the air yard share 63.7% Tyreek Hill, 32.1 to Jalen Waddle, and then nobody else reaches double digits in terms of air yards. That is it's insane how concentrated this offense is. I've tried to do the Waddle as leverage to Hill thing so many times, and it just never works out because Tyreek Hill just seems to always get there when he's healthy. But still, I still think it is a good idea, at least to try. It could happen at some point where Jalen Waddle breaks the long play and like they just don't have as many plays on offense. Tyreek Hill doesn't quite get there. Still within the realm of possibility. But I think everybody kind of knows who these guys are. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Tyreek Hill, the alpha. Jalen Waddle, very talented. If he gets the opportunity, he could break one, could have a great slate. But yeah, it's definitely the Tyreek Hill show overall. I did think this is interesting. Both the two leaders in route participation last week, Tyreek Hill and Waddle, both at 65.9%. That's pretty low, even for these guys. I mean, Tyreek Hill was 76% route participation last week. Didn't matter. You just look at the targets. I mean, I care a lot more about just raw targets, I think, than anything else. But sort of interesting. You have any takeaway for the lack of route participation?
Yeah, I did notice that. I'm not super worried about it. I just think it really just, I mean, would expect the routes to go up a little bit. Like, I think they're probably going to play on average, I don't know, like 80+% of the snaps. So yeah, 51 snaps for Waddle, 50 for Hill out of 71. Expect that to be a slight increase, but I'm not super worried about it. So yeah, I wouldn't read into it too much.
And then to me, the only other wide receiver who's in play is Braxton Berrios. He's at 1,200. Do you have any interest in playing Braxton Berrios? If you were playing in a large field GPP, playing 50+ lineups, how much interest would you have in Braxton Berrios?
Yeah, I think he's viable. He played 26 snaps, ran 22 routes, so almost half the routes. I think he's pretty clearly the wide receiver 3 here for Miami. reasonable price point. There's a lot of viable cheap options on the slate. Like
I know that makes it tough.
Yep. And Berrios, I think, is one of them. The other receivers, Grant Bows and Robbie Chosen, did play a little bit, but at a similar price range, I would just rather go to Berrios. It's not like Berrios is going to be popular, so I don't really see the point of going to one of those guys over Berrios, and it's not like Berrios is going to be super popular either. So, I think he's firmly in play here. Expect him to be kind of that slot guy, and with him playing running almost half the routes at that price point, makes him a solid value play.
Yeah, I think that he's totally fine. I looked at his game log from last year because he had like 6.3% target share last year, like really low target share for Berrios, as you'd probably expect. He did have one game where he hit double digits in PPR scoring, and I had to look it up because I was thought it was unbelievable. But both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were active. He did have one double-digit fantasy game with both active. And I think that's approximately the odds. It's like it's under 10% chance that he breaks double digits fantasy points. It might happen one time this year. Could happen in this game. So I think he's in play, but not like some priority for me. The Bills, probably the more interesting here. The Bills, Keon Coleman last week, and actually I'll just pull up the receiving. We have Keon Coleman kind of led the way last week for the Bills, had 5 targets, which was the most on the team, led the team in route participation at like 86%. Khalil Shakir, 70% route participation last week. I think he saw 3 targets. Curtis Samuel only ran here. I'm going to pull this up so I have the numbers exact, but it's kind of it's messy. It's messy with the Bills this week because short week. They knew it was going to be a short week. They knew that on Sunday. For those of you who aren't aware, they know the schedule, so they probably factored in that they had the short week before they had to play again. Now, what I question is, did that affect their usage of Curtis Samuel, who didn't play a lot? I think all offseason we kind of expected Curtis Samuel to be one of the 3 starting receivers, along with Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. So 30% route participation. Unclear to what extent that is due to the turf toe injury that he's recovering from. Maybe the short week they wanted to save him for this game. I don't know. What do you think about the Bills? And you can start with Keon Coleman because I think he is probably the best, the most like solid pick here. How much interest do you have in Keon Coleman, or would you in a large field GPP?
So Keon Coleman, as you mentioned, ran a vast majority of the routes last week. He played, 45 snaps of the 61 and ran 29 of the 32 routes. He's a guy that does have big play upside and someone they can look to in the red zone. And it's not like he's getting a ton of ownership. So I do have interest in Keon Coleman. I think right now I slightly prefer Shakir when you factor in ownership. I know Shakir didn't play as much as Keon Coleman. But he still ran 22 of the 32 routes, and obviously, there's no more Stephon Diggs, there's no more Gabe Davis, so there's still a lot of targets to go around. And I think Shakir is a guy that still does have a pretty high ceiling playing in the slot. So I think when you factor in everything, I slightly prefer Shakir. And then you mentioned Curtis Samuel, so I'm not super worried about. So here's one of the biggest one of the bets that I made this week was Curtis Samuel under 13.5 longest reception. Early. He only played 28% snaps and only ran 9 routes, and also he's a short guy. And McDermott said that the toe injury didn't impact when asked about Curtis Samuel's toe injury, he said didn't give the toe injury much mention and said that they were just going with the flow of the game. He did say Samuel did a good job.
Yeah, that's what he said. And I read that same quote, actually posted that quote in my article earlier. But I'm like, that's what he said. I don't know that I necessarily believe him 100%. Like that's sure. It's worth something that he's saying that it wasn't necessarily due to the toe. I do still think at some point he's going to have a bigger role than 30%. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Curtis Samuel was just not the guy that we thought he was going to be. But I mean, yeah, I think that is that. I like that you brought up that quote because I do think that is something to keep in mind, that at least the coach didn't bring up the toe. Like makes it sound like maybe he's just not. Maybe he's just not going to be the guy this year.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. One other point too on the Samuel thing is just that Matt Collins is ahead of him now in the depth chart. Week 1 they had Samuel as the wide receiver 3. Now they have Matt Collins listed ahead of him. Also, I mean, Samuel's more of a slot guy, and Shakir ran a vast majority of his routes from the slot.
81%, yeah.
So, like, I don't really know if there's a lot of playing time upside for Samuel. Could be wrong in that, and maybe he does get more involved. But I think if he was to get more involved, it would be week 3, not coming after a short week here. So yeah, I'm kind of on the Samuel, or I'm thinking that Samuel plays similar to what he did in week 1.
Okay, so you're thinking like 30% or less probably for Samuel. Yeah, it's one that's like, man, if the ownership gets low enough, then like probably worth the risk. It still looks like it's above double digits for Samuel, so that's like kind of borderline. Like, I don't think I'm going to really lean into that. I do think I'm with you. Like the risk is pretty significant there. I wanted to note with Shakir, and you kind of went over this, plays mostly in the slot, 81% slot routes last week for Shakir. My friend Derek Brown was a little tidbit, a little behind the scenes, shared with me that he thinks that this is a great spot for Shakir. So he is with you on the Shakir train. He thinks that Miami's slot cover cornerback just will not be able to stop Shakir. So could be a great spot for Shakir. And he's also a guy that, like, I was doing my write-up. He's not really, he's not a stud. He doesn't project all that well. He's also not a great point per dollar play. He's also not like super low owned. He's like 20-ish% ownership. So like doesn't like strike you as a great play. But if you want to lean into the matchup, like I do think that he is somebody that maybe we should lean into a little bit. So I think I'm going to be pretty above weight to that 20% on Khalil Shakir. So we are on the same page there. The other question then is, I mean, we look at these other options. So Shakir is 6,200, Coleman 5,800. I think both are great plays. I'm very into Coleman as well. Again, getting back to the idea of what about Josh Allen and captain with an onslaught of Bills, maybe going to go low and maybe include both of them. Off on Curtis Samuel. What are you doing with Matt Collins? So he's 1,600 here. Over 50% route participation, 53% route participation last week for Matt Collins. Kind of intriguing to me. He's a guy that I think is pretty interesting. Now, I want to double check that ownership hasn't come up too much. No, still looks like relatively low ownership on Matt Collins. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I think he's a pretty good value play here. The ownership with him and Curtis Samuel is basically the same, and the price difference is massive. And if that's going to be the case, like I'm just going to take the discount on Hollins for a guy that played a lot more than Curtis Samuel last week, and is coming in cheaper and is coming in a similar ownership. So I would say that I think Jeff Wilson's your top overall value, but I think Matt Collins is right there in that kind of that next tier of guys that I do like for salary relief. I'm expecting similar workload to week 1. So yeah, I do kind of like Matt Collins, and again, he's not projecting for insane ownership either.
Yeah. Jorge asked, Neil, what's your input on Hill never passing 100 yards versus the Bills? Not reading a lot into that. They have Tyrone Johnson out this game. Like it's just different, it's many years, different personnel every season. So, small sample size. I'm not that concerned about.
That's like that's like what I've seen today with the Josh Allen's never lost on Thursday. It's like one of those things where it's like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Shout out to Sean V. RIP for it's a Sean V consideration there. All right. Yeah, Matt Collins to me is one of the better. He's cheap. He is getting low ownership. Played a lot last week. 53% route participation. I'm actually pretty into. I think Matt Collins. So I guess there is your answer. He's low enough owned that I think I could call Matt Collins today's Allen Lazard / Rashad Bateman, like the low owned guy that I really like. I'm into it.
That's funny. That was going to be, if you're going to ask me that would be my answer too. I think it would be Matt Collins.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Any other Bills? I mean, MVS. You can see here, MVS ran just 4 routes last week, 13.3% route participation. Adam and I talked about, like, he does have the ability to just like break one open. So if I were 150 maxing, maybe I probably would have a few shares just because he's going to be low owned and we know the ability that he has to just have one long play and that pays off his salary. But I'm not like, he's definitely not somebody that I'm trying to get into lineups. I don't think I'm going to have any MVS tonight, where I'm playing limited lineups. Am I crazy to not play MVS in limited lineups?
No, that's totally fine. I think in 150 you could sprinkle him in. I believe on one of his, I think he had 2 targets. One of them was a deep ball. Obviously, he's there to stretch the field, so he does have upside. But yeah, I mean, very, very few snaps, very few routes. So it's really just like in 150, I would maybe have like a couple percent or something.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. Did we cover I think we covered every wide receiver, so I think we're good here, right?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about like Robbie Anderson or Chosen.
Oh yeah.
And Grant Duvall, but like I'm not really looking to those guys. I think, like I said, if I'm going to target one of those like cheap Miami receivers, I'd just rather go to Barrios.
Yeah, just looking at last week, Robbie Chosen 5 routes. So I guess he's, you could say the same thing about Robbie Chosen. I don't know. Does he still have the speed to break one open?
I think he's pretty dusty at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think he is too. Dubose at 6. I don't know. I don't think I'm playing either of those guys. So no need to talk about them all that much. All right, we will move on, talk about some tight ends. And of course, it all starts with Dalton Kincaid. Here, I'm moving the wrong direction here. Dalton Kincaid, the top projected tight end of the slate. Not a great point per dollar play. Projects for about 10 fantasy points at 7,200. So, that doesn't scream great value on Dalton Kincaid. He only saw 1 target last week, but on the flip side, did run routes on over 80% of dropbacks, I believe. Actually, I should pull that, but it might have been exactly 80. I forget what the number was. But it got better as the game went on. It was actually, I think, 90% in the second half, or maybe just the fourth quarter. But we saw, he was out there a ton, played some 12 personnel with Dawson Knox out there as well. I think, 80% route participation for Dalton Kincaid. Again, saw just 1 target, so that's not all that promising, but I think I'm willing to forgive and forget and say he's still Dalton Kincaid, still probably going to see some targets. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think Kincaid has a nice bounce back game here. I would be a little bit worried if like the routes weren't great or a snap percentage went down. But as you said, he played a vast majority of the game, ran a majority of the routes. And I think like a guy that does have a pretty high ceiling. So I think Kincaid's probably my favorite like contrarian play in the slate. I think he is viable in the captain too. I don't think he's getting much captain ownership, sub 5%. A guy that can look to in the red zone. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Kincaid here as a contrarian option. I think the box for watchers, maybe he'll go a little bit lower on for that reason. But again, the snaps and the route or the routes were still good. And we saw the upside with him last year. Right? He was putting up some big games, playing alongside Diggs and Gabe Davis. So I think Kincaid's going a little bit overlooked. Probably one of my favorite. I would say probably my favorite contrarian play this slate.
Yeah, I like Kincaid quite a bit. I mean, he's not that contrarian in the flex, but in the captain spot, sub 5%.
Yeah.
So really, really contrarian as a captain option. This is a defense that gave up the 7th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends last year. So like at least theoretically a good matchup for tight ends here. Now it is it's a new year. These things change year to year, but at least promising that last year they were bad against tight ends. So I do have a lot of interest in Kincaid, and I have a lot of interest in him as a contrarian captain as well. Dawson Knox. So speaking of the Bills tight ends, Dawson Knox 43% route participation last week. So it was promising to see that they actually ran, I want to say like 8 plays together. They ran routes in 12 personnel together. So I thought that was really promising to see that they are playing Kincaid and Knox together still. It's not like he's just the backup who comes in for Kincaid. They're playing together. They're playing some separately as well. 43% route participation. What is the price tag on Knox? Is 2,600. Last I saw, and I'm going to go look up some ownership, but was looking like pretty low ownership for Dawson Knox. So he's another one similar to Mac Hollins for me, where I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna lean into that low ownership a little bit because he is out there, should have some opportunities. 2 years ago, he had 7 games of 9+ fantasy points, DraftKings fantasy points. Now that was before Kincaid. Always have to remember that it was a different time, but I think he has that that connection with Josh Allen a little bit. So I'm pretty into it. Do you have any interest in Dawson Knox in large field GPPs?
Yeah, I like him as a value play. Obviously, I don't think he has as high of a ceiling as Kincaid, but coming at a way cheaper price point. I think we kind of talked about, Jeff Wilson. For me, Jeff Wilson being like your top value, and like there's like a group below that. I think Dawson Knox is in that group with like Mac Hollins and Geno Smith. We'll talk about here in a sec. So yeah, I think reasonable amount of routes, a guy that can play more when they get near the goal line as well. Does have some touchdown upside. So I think he's one of the better value plays on the slate. And as you mentioned, he's not getting a lot of ownership either. I think that's because there's a lot of viable values. But yeah, I think he's right there for me with like Hollins and Johnny Smith, who we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah, and I gave Mac Hollins as my Rashad Bateman of the day, my Alan Lazard of the day, but I think I could have done Dawson Knox. I was kind of going back and forth on those two. I think I like both quite a bit. All right, now we should get into these Miami tight ends, because this is once again kind of a mess. Jonnu is 2,800 on this slate, Durham Smythe 1,000, and then Julian Hill 600. You just take a look at what they did last week. They none of them really separated. We had Jonnu 34.1% rep participation, Durham Smythe 31.7, Julian Hill 24.4. You look at the targets, Jonnu had 2, Smythe had 3, Dubose had 0, or sorry, Julian Hill had 1. Nothing really standing out here about these Dolphins tight ends. So tell me about if you have any significant interest in any of them, and what's your ranking here of the 3?
Yeah, I think Smith would be my favorite. They all ran kind of split the snaps. I mean, Hill played the most amount of snaps, but it was Smith that ran the most amount of routes of the tight ends. He ran 19 routes, Hill 17 routes, Durham Smythe, last year's starter, 15 routes. Smith lined up a lot in the slot. So I think of these, and again, he only played 20 snaps or 19 routes, so he's clearly out there running routes when he's playing. So it's not like any of them are getting a lot of ownership. So I think Smith would be the preferred target there. But I will mention Julian Hill only projecting for 1% to 2% ownership as a viable complete dart throw, because he's projected for a lot lower ownership than the other two. Not any of them are going to be super popular, but yeah, I think Smith overall my favorite, but maybe a little bit interested in Hill because he's so low owned.
Interesting. Yeah, Hill is one that I'm having trouble landing on Julian Hill. But I get it. He is going to be super low owned, and I'm looking around the industry, sub 5% pretty easily on Julian Hill, which does make it sort of interesting. I think Jonnu is still the one that I'm the most interested in. We have a couple of fun facts here. Durham Smythe, I was looking at his game log for the past 10 games dating back to last year. 9 of the past 10, he has between 3 and 5 targets. So pretty consistent in that he is actually getting some targets. But I do think, you just look at 42% snap rate last week was cut in half from where it was at a year ago. So I don't think it's going to hold up. I think that was just fluky that he kept it up last week, even on limited snaps. I think that's going to drop. Jonnu is a guy that Mike McDaniel all offseason talked about how good Jonnu is with the ball in his hands. Yards after the catch, he is elite. He loves to have the ball in his hands and run with it. Mike McDaniel talked about it. And then they forced, they gave him 2 looks. Both were, he was the first read, very short. So it seemed like they're trying to just let's get him the ball, see what he can do with it. He didn't really do much with it last week, but I kind of like that they were trying to just all right, we'll just give Jonnu the ball short and see what he does with that. Only ran 14 routes last week. Again, just saw 2 targets, but it was promising to me that both of those targets, he was the first read. I kind of I hope that they do feed him down the field a little bit at some point, but it is at least kind of nice to see that they're okay, let's just see what he can do with the ball, with the ball in his hands. Maybe if they do that in the red zone, we could see him score a touchdown. So I'm kind of interested. I think Jonnu is my favorite of that trio, but definitely see the appeal of Julian Hill at really low ownership as well. Anything else about tight ends?
No, I mean, Tanner Conner did play 3 snaps, but I think it's kind of hard to go there. The only other tight end is Quentin Morris, but he played 6 snaps, didn't run any routes, so pretty safe thing to move on.
Yep. All right. So we've gotten through all of the players, except for kickers. What is your level of interest in kickers and defenses? Anybody stand out to you?
I think both kickers are pretty solid plays here. I think always the kickers in general go a little bit under-owned in the shutdown slate. So neither are super expensive. 4,800 for Bass, 4,400 for Sanders. Ownership in the mid to high teens for both. So I think both pretty safe values. Other than that, no real strong takes. But just in general, I do think the kickers go a little bit under-owned in the large field tournaments.
Yep. Probably small field tournaments too. I guess I don't play enough of those to really know, but yeah, I think the kickers both really solid plays. I don't have any real stance on like this kicker is better. Like I think they're both pretty solid, established NFL kickers. It just depends on who happens to have the team stopped in field goal range is what it comes out. It's kind of random with kickers. So I think both are solid plays because they are going to go under owned relative to their range of outcomes or their likelihood of hitting a score that you want, but yeah, it's really hard to have a real take on kickers because it just really comes down to okay, whose team is going to fail in the red zone or like near the red zone, and it's hard to know that going in. But I think solid plays. I'm not. That was one of my bigger stands with the Niners game. I said I thought one of the kickers was going to outscore both quarterbacks. Again, didn't take a stand on which kicker that was going to be. Did end up happening. Jake Moody had that great game. Not that bold when I can't even name the kicker, but I'm not taking that kind of stand today where I really think one of these kickers is going to separate because I think Josh Allen gonna outscore the kickers on this one. Feel good about that. And defenses, I mean, I don't know. They're probably going to go under. Like I think the field is less inclined to play defenses on this type of slate when there are so many fun and so many like under owned assets that are running backs, wide receivers. Like we all would rather play those than the defenses. Maybe what do you think of just playing defense? Like maybe the defenses are just the play that are actually going to be super low owned relative to the range of outcomes.
Yeah, I think the defenses for me are a little bit more interesting on a slate like this as opposed to a slate where it's projected to be low scoring. I feel like in those slates, the defenses always go way over owned. This slate, I think the defenses will go a bit under owned. I think most people are kind of playing or building their lineups around a lot of points being scored. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. But Josh Allen is pretty turnover prone. We've seen Tua throw a lot of picks as well. So I think the defenses are both fair plays, and neither super popular. I think if I had to pick between the two, I would give the edge to the Dolphins playing at home. They're actually slightly better and again a little bit cheaper, but both viable in my opinion.
Yep, I agree. Both are viable. Both it's again pretty unpredictable, but I think both are going to tend to go under owned relative to their range of outcomes. So pretty solid. If you're building a number of lineups for large field GPPs, I would definitely consider playing both kickers and defenses. There's not much more that I have to say about it. We have seen Josh Allen turn the ball over, a significant amount throughout his career. He's one of those high volatility, great quarterback who also turns the ball over a bit. So maybe a slight lean toward Miami there with the Bills banged up, especially. But other than that, don't have a ton to say about it. All right. Final portion of this show. We'll take some questions and I'm just going to throw up DraftKings here. DK, will you help me build a couple lineups real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's build a couple. Here, I'll just enter here. So this is for the Millie Maker, large field GPP. Who would be your preferred place to start at captain?
I think for me, I like Dalton Kincaid in the captain. As I said, I think he's going under owned in the captain spot. So I like him as a bounce back candidate. Let's start with Kincaid.
All right, we are on the same page with Kincaid. Do we just throw Josh Allen in here now? I mean, I think you can go both ways. I don't think you necessarily need to for large field GPPs, but is that your preferred way to build?
Yeah, tonight? I think we go Josh Allen.
Okay, and that makes it easier to kind of give you an idea of how much salary we have left. We still have over 7,000 remaining per player. I know you were super into Khalil Shakir. Do you want to go there?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think factoring in ownership, I slightly prefer him to Keon Coleman, but both those receivers are good plays.
Okay, and I guess we do need to consider the correlation a little bit. Like, do you have concerns about playing? I don't want to put players in your mind, words in your mouth with Khalil Shakir. We have Kincaid as the captain. That does make me slightly less inclined to play one of the other pass catchers in the flex. But I think like I'd be okay with playing one more. Probably don't want to play like 2 or 3 more. I don't know, maybe 2 more.
Yeah, no, I think putting Shakir in this lineup is totally fine. It's not like any of the Bills pass catchers are really expensive either. So yeah, I think that's totally fine.
Okay. And then, I mean, would you want to put, are we done now with Bills pass catchers, or would you want to throw in another Keon Coleman or something? The nice thing about this is the Bills pass catchers are cheap enough relative to Josh Allen that they don't necessarily need to outscore Josh Allen as long as we don't leave like 6,000 on the table. So we could throw on more Bills here if you want to do a full Bills onslaught. I think that would be fine. But do you have any other thoughts, like stands you want to take here?
Yeah, I think let's try to get to one of the Miami backs, either Achane or Wilson. I think that's a good point. Fine with either. Do you have any leans on for this lineup?
Well, let's see what happens. So we throw HN. We still have 6,200 left per player. So we have so much salary to work with. The pricing has been so soft this week. Now we could get another elite in here if we could even. I mean, we could play Tua and then throw in Jonnu's 2,800. Jeff Wilson's only 2,400. Wright is only 2,000. Plenty of options. Oh, sorry, I threw Tua in there. I meant to throw Tyreek in there. that was my mistake. Oh yeah, we can't do that. Oh, I mean, we would have 800 left. There's nobody I really like 800 or lower. I mean, that's like you could throw Julian Hill in there. That would not be my preference.
Of those guys, Hill would probably be your best bet, but
yeah. You want to throw Jalen Waddle in there? Like we need.
Yeah, I'm good going Waddle there.
Okay, now we have 3,800 left over. Now this is large field GPPs where I'm more inclined to leave a little bit of salary on the table. Who do you like here for a little bit of salary saving?
I think. Let's see. We have Waddle. I mean, I'm fine going Jeff Wilson and kind of playing both backs and eating the salary.
I am too. Yep. Eating the salary. I think ownership will be a little bit low on that. So here's one lineup. I don't hate that. I kind of like this lineup. I think it's an interesting one, at least. Leaving 1,400 on the table. Certainly can see how this lineup wins. So there you go. There's a lineup for DraftKings. All right, let's make another one. Now we did Kincaid. Can we try a Josh Allen onslaught lineup?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so Josh Allen in the captain spot. Let's go with Shakir again. Let's go with Coleman again. Not again. I guess we didn't use him in the last one. And then I feel like Dawson Knox or Matt Collins works here.
Yeah, I'm good with. Let's go Matt Collins.
All right, we'll go Matt Collins in this one. Now we have so much salary left. I mean, this is it's insane how easy it is to make lineups right now. What if we do we want to go Tyreek Hill?
Yeah.
And then Kincaid. I mean, we could throw Kincaid in this lineup. This is a full-on Bills onslaught. Is this what you would want to do, or do you think are there any swaps you would want to make here?
Yeah. What's the salary left over to? It's like 1,000.
1,100. Yeah.
100. Yeah. No, I think that's good. I like the Bills onslaught in general. I think is going to be underowned, but especially leaving a little bit of salary on the table, I think you'll very very few dupes. And I think like this makes sense too. Like in a game where Buffalo wins maybe 35 to 14 or something, and Tyreek has most of the offensive production, and the Bills kind of spread it out. I like it.
Yeah. And then somebody shouted out a Mac Hollins captain lineup. We'll do one of those really quick. And then have you looked at FanDuel at all? I have not looked closely. We got a question about it. I can look at it very briefly before we end, but we got to get to I got to get to building my lineups in a second here. Mac Hollins a captain. Now, I mean, you have 95-20 left per player. Super easy.
Kind of just jamming the studs.
Yeah, I mean, we like Kincaid, Cook. Now you throw would you rather play Tyreek Hill or Josh Allen? I mean, we could maybe play both and then try to.
I think you probably get both, right?
Yeah. And then we still have 8,800 left over. You can throw Waddle in there. I mean, this will be chalky. I think this would be the type of lineup that Matt Collins comes in at low captain ownership, but then this lineup is still duped a ton. Like this is the absolute type of lineup that will happen.
That type of lineup I think would be a little minus EV, just because even though I do like the idea of Matt Collins captain, I think people that are playing Matt Collins captain a lot of people are going to have this same lineup.
Village Bar wants to know ownership on Jonnu and Smythe, and it's very low on both. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but we're seeing sub 10% on both Jonnu Smith and Durham Smythe, between 5 and 10%. I'll give you that range since I'm not working directly with sites that have projected ownership. And then FanDuel, let me just look real quick. I mean, I think that it's going to be, you can get pretty easily contrarian at captain. We're not going to build a lineup here, but outside of quarterbacks and Tyreek, everybody is fairly low owned at the captain on FanDuel. So I think going with James Cook, super low owned, Dalton Kincaid, super low owned. If you just start there, you can basically play chalk, leave a little bit of salary on the table. So pretty easy to build on FanDuel. As far as utility plays who are going to be contrarian on FanDuel, I mean, we talked about Khalil Shakir quite a bit. He's 10,500, going to come in at relatively low ownership as a result. So I think he's a pretty strong contrarian-ish play, sub 15% projected ownership. if you want to go. I mean, I do like the idea of playing somebody like Mac Hollins on FanDuel, where it is half PPR, easier if he just scores a touchdown to be in the optimal lineup. He is going to go like sub 5% ownership. I like him quite a bit. So I think that there are some pretty solid options. You can go. Ty Johnson is just 6,000 on FanDuel. Again, not going to get any ownership. Play Jeff Wilson, actually going to get sub 10% on FanDuel. That's pretty interesting. Jeff Wilson, he's 6,500, looking at sub 10% ownership. FanDuel is a lot of fun plays tonight on FanDuel, I'll say.
Yeah. If Wilson, I haven't looked at it at all, but if he's sub 10%, I think he's a great play on FanDuel.
Yeah. And yeah, right ownership we're asked about is also very, very low on FanDuel, sub 10% on Jalen Wright. So very contrarian. DK, really appreciate you doing this show with me. This was so much fun. Where can people find your stuff? What do you got going on?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on YouTube. I'll do mainly videos right now, but doing stuff for NFL, prop stuff, and DFS stuff. It's DK DFS, and then Twitter, it's DK __ DFS. I'll have both DFS and prop content there as well.
Yep. So go check out DK if you haven't already. You should be able to find a link to his YouTube page is in the description of this video. Does a lot of great content. Go check out DK there as well. Thanks, DK. Thank you all for hanging out with us. Please do subscribe, like the video. All that stuff really does help. Trying to grow the channel would be quite helpful. Thanks, guys, and we will catch you later.